So I'm sure many of you guys have heard of Electron just going through the conference. It's obviously been like a kind of like a little buzzword. You've quite heard it probably quite a few times. How many of you guys have not actually coded in Electron yet? Anybody? Oh, a lot more than I expected. Seems like everybody I talked to is like, yeah, I've been using it for 6 months. That's awesome. So just a quick thing. What is Electron? Basically, it's a way to build cross-platform applications with web technologies that many of you guys have already been using. Most of you guys are Node developers or JavaScript-like developers. So making a web application with JavaScript, CSS, and HTML is something you guys are all probably really familiar with or can do really easily. So a few examples of Electron. The first obvious one is Slack. I think most of us have been using this for the Node PDX Slack room. I have a little screenshot here. It's a great example because almost everybody knows about it. I think it's slightly not a great example because it's not exactly an open source project, which I dislike slightly. And obviously because it's open source, it means you can't get the source, as you see here. Did not get the source. Another fun one is the emoji bar, and this allows you to have a tray icon in the top left. You can see that over here. You type in some kind of keyword, like keyboard, really obvious for the music that's been going on. It'll give you the two emojis that are keyboard related. You can click on one, copies it to your clipboard, and you can paste it somewhere. Another fun one I like to use is the Mongotron. If you guys are Mongo developers or the databases, this is really awesome for that. Just basically, it's a GUI for that. You point this to your database. You have all your collections, has a little place for your query, and some meta information. It's really awesome. I think the best part about this application is actually probably the logo. If you guys can see this in the back. One of the last ones I'm going to talk about, just as an example, is the Electron API demos. It's really just like this cool Electron app that demos all the Electron API. So it's like documenting Electron with Electron, which is downloadable from their website. It's also on GitHub. The last three are all on GitHub, so go check them out. So let's talk about the history of Electron. And as many of you are probably aware, the history of Electron actually starts with the history of Atom. So Atom is a text editor. Here's a picture of me editing Atom with Atom. It started in 2014, or about 10 JavaScript frameworks ago, if you guys are counting in that. And it uses web technology, quote unquote, which I kind of explained earlier. It's not PHP or Java, which we might consider web technology or not. But obviously it's using HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and Node to kind of mix all that stuff together. And the best part about it, I think, is it's open source. So you can go online, find the source code to Atom, and download it, edit it, make your own editor, make plugins for it. It's really nice like that. You might compare that to other popular text editors, not naming names. And then after a while, they're like, hey, we have this thing called Atom, and it has this cool thing where people can make web apps or desktop apps using web technology. So they kind of broke it out. They originally called it Electron Shell, or sorry, they called it Atom Shell, and then they changed it to Electron. So now anybody can use it and make their own desktop applications. You saw that in the previous slide and a few other presentations, people are using Electron for various things. So now let's keep on going with the how do we actually Electron? And so before we really start with code, there's two key concepts that I want to kind of go over with Electron. The first one's just understanding how Electron kind of works, and the second one's more of just a best practice that many people follow that took me a little bit of time to kind of wrap my head around of why you would want that. And so the first one is the render of the main processes. You can see here I have just a screenshot. It's not really a screenshot, it's kind of a fake screenshot, but you can see I have Chrome open. You can see at the bottom there's that little dot indicating that Chrome is actually alive, and then I have two windows with Chrome. If I start closing out the windows, you'll see that the dot's still there, indicating that the process is still alive. On a Windows, this might be a little bit different action or behavior. Usually on Windows, if you close out all the different tabs or windows on it, the Chrome itself would be closed. And then if you actually close Chrome, it does, in fact, the little dot goes away. And so I kind of think of the Chrome little dot at the bottom, that's the main process, which is usually just some kind of node thing that spins up a few, the render processes. And those are, the different Chrome tabs. So as a quick little diagram, we have Electron at the top. It creates a main process. And the main process can exist just by itself. And then that main process can potentially spin up multiple render processes or multiple tabs and close those whenever it needs to. The second concept that I want to go over is just a double package JSON. Many of you are like, wait a minute, I don't want a single package JSON. Why would I want two? And the idea here is, took me quite a little bit to understand this one, is that in the project package JSON, you might have your dev dependencies, your Mocha, your different development tools, your packagers, things like that. And in your app package JSON, you want your regular dependencies for the actual application, your production dependencies. The reason that this is a good idea and that a lot of boilerplates kind of go with this route is so that when you're bundling it, you can say, hey, Electron, bundle this application directory, and it doesn't have to distinguish between dev dependencies and regular dependencies. You can just bundle that whole thing in some kind of file, depending on which operating system you're building it for, and then say, hey, here's this thing. And then you kind of say, okay, now it's not overloaded with a bunch of dev dependencies that nobody cares about. And so I was going to stop here and ask for questions, but so far nobody at this conference has actually asked a question. So if you have a question, quickly raise your hand. If not, oh, there is a question. Yes.
How you doing?
Doing great. How are you?
Awesome.
Ooh, okay, question first. Awesome. Another question.
So there's been a lot of talk about React Native recently.
Sure.
I just want to know, have you worked with React Native, and what do you think are the different use cases for Electron versus React Native? Use cases.
Sure. So I think the question was, have I used React Native, and what do I think about it? Answer is no, I've not used React Native. Have not found a problem that needs to be solved with it yet. So sorry, can't really answer that question. I'm sure somebody else in the audience would be happy to. Yes?
The last time I looked at Electron, they had a boilerplate kind of package, but
Yep.
it was 100 megabytes or something like that.
100 megabyte boilerplate. That sounds large. I don't think that's true anymore.
Are you going to show how to get started and then resources and stuff like that?
Yeah, that'll be in the talk. That's in there. Basically the question was, he mentioned that he found a boilerplate a while back ago that was a rather large one, about 100 megabytes. That's not really true anymore. I think I packaged a boilerplate that I found which is a little bit bigger than the one Electron found, or the one Electron sponsors, and it was about 20 megabytes. So, sorry? Yeah, the size does change between different operating systems. I'm not sure. It wouldn't be like gig difference. It's just a small, probably kilobyte difference. Okay, so let's go quickly over just a code example. And in this code example, I'm just going to show the two files. There's going to be a main process and a renderer process. You really just need the main process to get an Electron app running, but usually doesn't do a whole lot without that first renderer process. In these code examples, you might see they're hopefully small. They're about 10 lines. You don't have to understand all of them. I'm going to point some arrows at the important bits, and you can kind of see what's there. And so in this first one, here's the main JavaScript file. And the first thing you see, we're doing a lot of just normal JavaScript-y stuff here. You see at the top, we're kind of including Electron, and then, Electron by default creates this app. We don't really tell it to start, it just starts it by itself. And it gives us this event for ready. You'll know that you're Electron when everything is an event emitter, I've always thought, because everything is an event emitter. But it events some ready event, and at that point, you can kind of do whatever you want with it. And so the first thing I do is I create a main window, which is a renderer process. I give it a height and a width, nothing too interesting here. I load a URL, and then I open up the dev tools, because you need your dev tools. And then you can see here I actually have some behavior that's more Windows-like. So basically when that main window closes, when all the windows are closed, I want to quit my application. And you see quite often in different boilerplates say, hey, if it's a Windows, do it this way. If it's a Mac, do it this other way, so that it keeps up that main process whenever the user quits. And so in the renderer process, which you saw over here that we were loading this one, so this is the same file, and this is just a quick little app I threw together. This one has a little bit more HTML. There's just a few lines of JavaScript in the middle, and this is one of the slides that I thought was when I first heard about Electron, I was mind blown here. It's you're having HTML, but right there in line 15, you're doing a file system read file. That's Node. Wait a minute. And so here I'm just, I'm requiring a secrets.json file. And then a little bit lower, I'm using some DOM manipulation to concatenate all of them with HRs, and then throw them inside the div on line 10. And what this actually ends up looking like is something like this. Hello PDX, Node PDX. And so what you might expect from a typical web workflow is, you have Chrome kind of running, and it talks to some server to store some data, and that server talks to some database. Database responds, the server responds, user's happy. With Electron, and for a lot of good use cases, You don't need that server. You can talk directly to a database with Electron, which I probably should have changed out the icon, but you get the idea. Or you can talk directly to the database, to the file system. Whatever Node can do, you can do in Electron. There's quite a few useful APIs that you can be using with Electron. Obviously, when it's something that needs to be cross-platform, you can't just, PB copy or something like that to get to the clipboard. You have to be a little more cross-platform with that. The first one is the dialog. I think this is like a really common one for a lot of developers. Like, for instance, if you have something like Atom or text editor or the Mongotron, you need to be able to open up a file, and you need to be able to save a file, but you don't want, Chrome to handle that. You want to say, okay, give me the file path, and I'll do whatever I want with that. So this gives you the ability to, open up a file and just give you the string, and then from that string, you could decide, okay, it's a SQLite database, I can open that using this program. Or when you're saving something like a project or a file, you can just get where they want to save it, and then save it to that directory. The global shortcut's another interesting one, and there's really 3 types of shortcuts in Electron. The first one here is the global shortcut, on which I'm going to go over. And in this one, the idea behind the global shortcut is like, even if my app isn't focused, even if it's like minimize, gone away, it's still active, but it's not really focused. I need this command to always exist. You might think of like Spotlight, when you hit like Command space, Spotlight shows up no matter where you're at. And so in this case, basically I have a global shortcut saying, oh, when Command R is pressed, console log it, and then when my app is quitting, I want to unregister it. So this is really important. It's been emphasized plenty of times in all the different documentation that you need to unregister them. If you actually quit your application or like force quit an application that doesn't actually do the unregister, that keyboard shortcut will persist in the system, and you can't always get it back with it unless you like restart your computer, which is kind of odd. So I explicitly unregistered the command that I created, and then I unregistered all. Another interesting one is the menu. Most applications have different various menus. And in this one, you can see I have a menu with some action, which has the command R. This is a different command R. This is actually a command or a keyboard shortcut that only exists when you're focused on the application. So you might think of like this command R, actually refreshing a Chrome tab. That refreshing in the Chrome tab isn't going to just happen when you're not on the browser. So when your application's focused, this keyboard shortcut can exist. What I really like about the menu icon, or sorry, the menu different keyboard shortcuts, is that these can be overwritten by the user. So if you expose these to the user through this menu, they can go in, at least in Mac, I don't know about Windows, I actually haven't checked. They can go over here and overwrite them. So if there's like one conflicting with something that they need, or they just don't like how this one is, they can just overwrite it. I think it's very, very powerful. So here's just an example of how to create that menu. It's really simple. It has some labels, some menu, and then it has another label for the refresher. And you can see that it has like some kind of click event. It has something called an accelerator that's basically just a keyboard shortcut. There's plenty of docs on the accelerators and how they work, which ones you can use. There's lots of different syntaxes for them. They're also case insensitive, really nice. You can see at the bottom they also have the build the menu and actually shove it somewhere. You also have the tray icon. So a lot of applications are just tray icons. You saw earlier the emoji bar. It doesn't have any dock icon. It just exists in the tray. So here's an example of just an Electron tray icon. I kind of hovered over it so it was blue, but normally it would just look normal, just to give it some emphasis. And these also have menus. So when you click on these things, it exposes some kind of menu, just like in the previous menu. And those can also have their own shortcuts. And the clipboard is also really interesting. One thing I didn't know about the clipboard is that it had multiple formats when you copy something. So if you go to like a web page that is like H2, a span with some color, things like that, you copy it. I thought it was just like some kind of raw text or something, but it didn't really make sense. I didn't really think about it, I guess. When you go into like Chrome or Inbox, create a new message, paste that in there, paste it with the formatting. But if you go into like Terminal or Notepad or something like that, it pastes it without the formatting. And basically what, at least on Mac, what it's doing is when you copy something, it copies the raw text in the HTML formats. And when you paste, that thing determines what you want. So if you go and copy an image to your clipboard and go to Terminal, it's not going to paste correctly. And so Electron allows you to read from the clipboard in any of these formats, and then write to the clipboard in any of these formats. I've seen quite a few like clipboard managers for these things. So it stores like the last 40 or so things in your clipboard inside some kind of SQLite type database, and then exposes some way of viewing all those and then pasting them back out onto your clipboard. Another one that's really interesting is the IPC. So because there are different processes, you have the render process and the main process. Those things sometimes need to be able to talk to each other. So in this specific diagram, you have one renderer process, and you have, so you have two render process and a main process. The main process says, hey, I'm going to listen for this event called close window. And then the renderer process on the below here says, hey, I'm going to send this event called close window. The main process is listening for that, and then it closes the window. Supposedly, it doesn't actually show this in the diagram, but we'll assume it closes the window. For this particular instance, this is the renderer process talking to the main process. There's also ways for that main process to talk to a specific renderer process, but if you need like a renderer process to talk to everything or the main process to talk to everything, that's a little bit more complicated. I think I wrote something like to do that in about 40 lines of JavaScript, which isn't like a lot, but it's not something that's built in. So the last thing I'm going to talk about with the APIs is the auto updater. And so a lot of different applications obviously need to auto update. And if you're using Slack, you probably realize that it doesn't work all that well. But for the auto updater, basically exposes some kind of API to talk to some Squirrel server, which it negotiates the versioning, it gives you packaged files based on which operating system you're in, and then helps you install and restart the application to get that all working. And there's also quite a few useful packages that you can be using for Electron. A few of these are specifically for Electron, but not all of them are. A lot of the node packages work just fine with Electron. I think there's a few that have had a little problematic, but for the most part, I think most of them work really well. The first one is GH releases. So this one's really nice. It's kind of working with the auto updater I just mentioned a second ago. But this specifically says, hey, a lot of these open source projects are open source. They don't exactly have like some kind of server to put up the squirrel thing on and have that kind of negotiation that's going on. Even for an open source project, a few cents or whatever just to keep some like Heroku instance up, not everybody wants to do that. So this works with the GH releases as long as you have GitHub on. Basically what this allows you to do is put all your stuff on GitHub releases, put all your EXEs, your APPs, etc. there, and this will help negotiate that stuff for you using the auto updater. And then you don't have to have some kind of Squirrel server in the background. The Electron builder, and there's also Electron packager. There's two different ones. They both have slightly different APIs, but basically they both do the same thing. Is the output say, hey, here's my Electron app. Give me the different instances of my application in these different formats. So you put it you point it to an Electron app, and it says, okay, here's the exe for Windows or the NuGet package or whatever. Then here's your DMG for Mac or your DMG for the Linux, etc. You go to me, which is always really nice to have. And the last one's Node Notifier. This one's just a node package. So this isn't specifically for Electron, but it works really well with Electron. So in Slack or whatever, you get like a message from somebody. Obviously, you want some kind of message to indicate that, hey, something's happened, even though the user isn't focusing on my application. Here you can just say, okay, include Node Notifier, and then say, hey, write a notification. This works with the native API for notifications. I think Node Notifier has some kind of adapter pattern for the different platforms that's abstracted out to you so you don't have to care about it. I think the only downside of that, because it's an abstracted API, is with like, for instance, the Mac notifications, you can often have things where like you can have buttons on the side or some kind of reply box. Because this is something that works in every single operating system, that doesn't always exist. So on Windows they don't have those kind of functionality, so in Node Notifier they also don't. There's also quite a few useful boilerplates. I know that you mentioned that you had a boilerplate you saw. Electron releases a boilerplate themselves called the Electron Quick Start. So you can see this is something they reference in their documentation and their README. It's really nice. It's really boiled down, I think, is that it has just exactly what you need to get started. It helps you really understand the anatomy of the different projects, or of the project, creating one, how to get started, things like that. But it doesn't include everything you necessarily need. If you want to get something that's more packaged, bundled up, you might want something else, which goes to the next boilerplate, is the Electron boilerplate here. This is one I've used personally. It's really nice because it comes with all those things. So it has all the build tools kind of built in for you, has the releasing in there, so you just do npm run release. It creates some release directory, throws all your releases in there. Everything you really need to get started with Electron. But it's a little more complicated. This is one of the ones that has like the double package JSONs. It's a little more confusing to get into just starting out. But overall, I do think this is a great boilerplate for that. And as a conclusion, Electron is easy to use. You should be using Electron for a lot of your things. It seems like a lot of people already are using Electron for a lot of things. So go build something. It's really easy to do. Music things, or other text editors or GUIs or something like that. You can do it for a lot of different stuff. Thank you. And I do have some Electron stickers if anybody wants to come talk to me after. Thank you.